Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on for the GreyTech PowerPack Summer School. We will wait till bang on time to start. Hopefully everyone can hear me and see the slide. I will send out a pulse check now. If someone could give me a thumbs up that you can hear me and you can see the slide, that would be great. Okay, lovely. Got a couple of responses there. So sounds like you can hear me okay. That is all good. Like I said, we'll wait till 10 o'clock before we do start. Wait for everyone to join. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this part 3 of the summer school, where today we're going to look at PowerPack Premium Stairs. Now, as this is a new interface for everyone, I can see that a few people have said my video is frozen. I think it's frozen because I have turned it off for now, just to save bandwidth. So that's probably why I am frozen. Now, just before we do start, I will just highlight a few things. You should see that if I highlight here, this is where our slides are showing in the slide area. If you do have any questions, you can add them into the Q&A area. And at some point, we will switch to a video, and that will show in the media player, which should have my face in it at the moment. I'm not sure why it wasn't on, why it is frozen. Okay, Alec is saying that he can't hear me. I'm just going to send a pulse check out again. Could someone else confirm that you can actually hear me? Alec is saying he's got some sound issues, but can anyone else hear me? Okay, lovely. Thank you, Howard. That is great. So I will proceed based on that. If there are any issues, please let me know in the Q&A and we will try and rectify that. So let's crack on with today's webinar. Today we are going to be looking at the PowerPack stair tool. So a little bit about me. I've got 14 years experience in the construction industry. 8 of that was an architectural metalwork and steelwork draftsman using advanced steel. During that time, I worked in 2 subcontract drawing offices, and that allowed me to work on various projects across multiple sectors. So now I work as a technical specialist in the structures team for Greytech in the UK. So I do your training, your tech support, customization, anything to do with structural CAD packages. Obviously, my main focus is advanced steel, but I do look at other software as well, not just advanced steel. Okay, so what are we going to look at today? So this is part 3 of our 4-part series, looking at different stages of our advanced steel modeling. As it's nearly back to school time here in the UK, we have decided between myself and Alec that we are actually going to do a whole school building. So part 1 and 2 was Alec using the structure designer and connections within the PowerPack and just normal advanced steel connections. Today we are going, so we've done part 1, we've done part 2, adding joints to the structure. Today we are going to be looking at part 3, which is the stair tools. Now, before I start, just because I'm interested in this, could you answer, I'm just interested to see, do people have a PowerPack? If so, what license do you have, professional or premium? So the premium are the stairs and railings tools. Do you have it installed and are you using it? So I will keep that survey up for 30 seconds or so. Okay, we will close the poll there. So looking at the results, we've got 50% have a professional license and it is installed and are using it, and 50% have a premium license and it is installed and you are using it, which is good. Not everyone answered, but that is good to hear from our side here at Greytech. Okay, so what are we going to be looking at today? So we're going to start by looking at what's included within the PowerPack Premium stairs. This is critical. What setting out points do we use? Because they are different. Then we'll look at a live demonstration, and then during that live demonstration, I will look at how you guys can get the correct geometry from the macro, and then the macro options and the settings. So what's included within the macro? So first off, you get multiple flight configurations. So we get a straight stair, we get a straight stair with a landing. We then get 2 flights in different configurations, so a U-shaped or a Z-shape. you would get a 3-flight stair, again in a U or Z-shaped, and we also have balanced stairs. Not used as much for us if you're joining us from the UK, but there are options within the macro, or there are macros for balanced stairs. And then options within the macro. So we can model plate stringers. We can create treads with that are special parts. If you're buying stock items off the shelf, you can set those up within the macro. We can put nosing bars on within the macro. We can then look to extend our inner stringers through to the outer stringers so that you're modeling it in the way that you're going to construct it. For our landings, top and bottom, we can have an offset to the left or to the right. And there is obviously an option for straight landings. For bigger stairs, which is what I'm going to be showing today, we can then put landing support ribs in. And then obviously with those bigger landings, we can then actually start to split those landings up into chunks that we need. Now, setting out points, please don't skip this step. You will, by the end of this session, you will be sick to death of me saying this, but on any stair, it's critical that we know all the setting out points. So whether we're using the out-of-the-box macros, whether we're modeling it manually, whether we're using the PowerPack macros, it doesn't matter. Put the time in to get your 2D geometry set up. I'll repeat it again. Please don't skip this step. If you send me an email and say, Rob, I can't get the staircase to work, and you haven't put the time in for the setting out points, you're probably not going to get it to work. Now, the Greytech, the PowerPack Premium stair tools, they do use different setting out points to the out-of-the-box macro. So that's typically what you would draw, and you'll see that when we get to the actual demonstration in here. But that is typically what I would draw out. And if we look at this slide here, you can see the 2 stars. So for the PowerPack macros, we work off the bottom of the first tread and then the top of the last tread, or the top of the landing in there. So that's the information that you need. Now, if your staircase has an overlap, so if you have a constant overlap, when we choose a point to define the last point of the staircase horizontally and vertically, it needs to include that overlap. So if everyone looks at this image that we have here, so on this particular staircase, we have a 230 going, but you can see that I want a 50 mil overlap. If you look at the top left point, there is a blue point that is 50 millimeters past the last tread, the last nose position. This is because I need a constant overlap throughout my staircase, so my last setting out point must include that overlap point. And this is what I will be demonstrating today. Landing extension. So if we have multiple flights within our staircase, we have what we call landing extensions. So for a 2 or 3 flight staircase, there will be a landing extensions. Again, to get the macro to work properly and to fall in line with all of our setting out, you need to know these values before we start. So if we have a look here, you can see that on this screenshot, I've got at the top of the first flight, so just past tread number 9, I have a 230 millimeter landing extension. So that is just a short horizontal point before we actually step onto the landing. And then when you're on the landing and you're about to go on to the second flight, there's a 460 millimeter landing extension. So you need to know that information on a multi-flight stair. Not sure I've got that same slide in twice. Let me just jump to this bit. So we are going to go into the live demonstration. Now that live demonstration, it should automatically start playing and it should automatically fill the screen. If it doesn't, you need to go to your media player, but this should start playing automatically. Okay, so let's actually get into this. So I have the summer school model from Alec, and if I go to our Project Explorer, I have added in here a model view for the stair because there's quite a lot going on. If I click the model view, bang, there we go. We're just working in our stair area. Now I'm going to repeat what I talked about in the presentation, and I'm going to keep banging on about it and keep banging on about it, and every time I show the stairs I am going to keep going on about it, but you need to have this setting out information in here before we get going. Now we might have done maybe a little bit, you might say we've probably gone a little bit overkill here for this today's presentation, but we have our rises and our going drawn in. We have, and we've done it on the center line, and we've done the inner and outer just so we can see where everything is. We have our landing extensions here that I've dimensioned up so that we can see it. And then we do want a 15mm overlap on this stair, so if I come in here, you can see that my last point in here, that's where the tread finishes. This is where my landing extension point is, and in fact that staircase is going to actually hit the beam, so we'll just quickly move it back so we'll get everything in there, and we will move it in the Y direction. We'll just pull it back 500mm for today, for today's example. Maybe a bit far. So we'll move it again. Go to select objects. Now just a tip, if you have selected something previously, rather than drawing a window again, I can type PREV for previous, and that will pick that up. We'll just move it to 50 this time. But I have all of that information there. I've worked out my landing extensions. I know how many treads I've got in each flight. I've got my extension. I've got everything worked out. That's what we need to have in to make sure that we are successful with these macros. Now, the PowerPack stairs and railings tools are accessed from a palette. So if we go to the PowerPack tab, or in the 2022 and the 2023 versions, they're accessed from a palette. Older versions, they were actually just functions on the ribbon, but we've put them in a palette. So you can see here we have the stairs and railings vault, which I have in my stack of palettes already. And then within our stairs here, you've got the little fly out to the right, especially if you're new to any of these tools in the PowerPack, just any tools in the Advanced Steel palette, you will have a little preview. You'll notice those pictures are the ones that I've conveniently put in my presentation. And then you have a description of what the macro will do and what our selection points are. So we are going to do 2 flights in a U-shape. So we start the macro. The system then asks me for my first point in the XY plane, so that's my start point here. Then it wants the first turning point, so that's this point here. And again, we've drawn these points out so I can easily pick them. Second point here. Third point, just I'm going to go in just to, you see, there's where I physically want the tread to stop, but because I've got my overlap, I need to come to this point here, and then I need to come up to define the height, which is this point here, and then is my stair to the right, center, or to the left. So because my setting out points are on the center, I'm choosing center, so I'm doing 1 and enter. And then we'll just let the macro build the stair. Now it is doing the 2 flights with the landing, so it is going to take a few seconds. We just want to be patient here. If we get crashes with Advanced Steel, it will crash. Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook will crash from time to time. And I have noticed that I have been silly there because I'm on the construction layer because I was putting my construction in. we should, as everyone knows, we should be on the standard layer and the system will take care of everything for us. So we'll just click those points again. And we'll just put that in again. So we were saying a minute ago, the system will crash, but sometimes we can make it crash more than we're expecting it to. The system then was building the staircase. If I start clicking things because it's not happening quick enough, that potentially could cause it to crash. So there is my staircase. Now that's not correct to begin with. It's not got the right number of treads in. Now the order that we set this up is important. What we need to do, we need to go to the landing. I know my landing width here is 2 meters. So I'm going to set that to 2 meters. Then I want to come in and set my treads. I know in this one we want a going plus overlap. So I want to set the macro to use going plus overlap. And then for my tread type, I know I want folded treads, so folded plates. So I'm going to set that to folded plates. And then in my dimensions, I'm going to set the overlap in here. And this is why, third time I banged on about it today, I need to know this information before I start. So my overlap is 15 millimeters. So we go landing, then choose our tread layout, so going a plus overlap, choose our tread type. If we have an overlap, set that at this point. And then we can come into the definition of our staircase in here. So you need to go in the order that we talked about here. The width of the flight is 2 meters. And my landing extension for flight number 1, so this dialog, the geometry, because we've got 2 flights in our staircase, for flight number 1, my minimal landing extension, the landing extension that I want, is 250 millimeters. So I set that in there. Then for flight number 2, my minimal landing extension here, let's just check I've got that right, is 480 millimeters. So I'm setting that. Now, it's still not quite right, but this is the order that we have to go through to set the macro up. And then I can go into the ergonomics tab, and it's not using the number of steps that I require. So I'm going to untick the automatic fit. And because I've set this out before and I know my geometry, I know that I want 9 treads in each flight. And here we can see that the macro is now following all of my setting out points and my geometry points. Now the last thing I'm going to change is the angles of my treads in here. So I'm going to go back to the tread type. I'm then going to go into the sub-tab called Dimensions. And in detail number 1, I'm going to set the nose here to 50 millimeters. And I want it at minus 90 degrees. I want my length here to be 160. And I want my angle to be 90 degrees. At this point, I can then go back to my definition. I can look at the ergonomics. Now, I knew before I started this, because I'd done my setting out, I knew what my rise and going was. I do have a rise of 175 millimeters, and I have a going of 230 millimeters. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm actually going to come out of the dialog. I'm going to go to a 2D wireframe, and I'm just going to check my geometry. Because I've put the work in and I've done the setting out points, I can then check all of my geometry. So you can see here, this is the 2D setting out that I drew. There is my rise and my going. Here's my overlap. we can see that at the bottom my height is correct. We can see in here that this is where my landing starts and stops. This is where my first tread starts. I've still got the 15mm overlap in here. And then when we come to the top, if I do a distance, if I go from this point here to this point here, in the X direction, that's 15mm. I haven't turned my top landing on yet, but when I do turn my top landing on, I can put my drop down in there so that my landing is set to the correct point. But that is, and we can see in here as well, these are the geometry points for my stringers. My landing is 2 meters wide, so I've got my AutoCAD line in here. There's the AutoCAD line for that's where I wanted my stringer to be positioned. That is following all of my geometry. That's why we take the time, we put the work in to get that 2D geometry. Even if it takes you half an hour, it is so worth getting all of that information, because then we can extract all of that data from my 2D setting out points, and then the staircase is going to follow exactly what I want it to do. Now, we have got some work to get this staircase to the point that we want it to get to, but without that starting information and that setting out information, it's pointless trying to use the stair macros. We need all of that information to get to this point. I'm going to hit save at this point so we don't lose anything, and then we can actually go back in to start changing this staircase to how we want it set out. Okay, so now we have the basics sorted. Let's go back into the macro and see what we can do for our staircases with the PowerPack Premium Stair Tool. So now you can either double click the joint box. Just an advanced deal tip for any joint: if you click on an element of the joint, you can right click and go joint properties. So some people like to have the joint boxes off, they like to have the layer off, because on a big model they do start to get in the way. But you can then come in here and that brings the dialog up. So we've done all of our setting out. We're now going to spend the rest of this webinar looking at what we can do within the macro itself. So let's go to the stringer. Now, as I talked about in the presentation a little bit earlier, one of the key features with these PowerPack Premium Stair Tools is we have the option to use plate stringers. So we can do our sections from beam profiles, or we can choose plate stringers. One thing to note, because I've had a couple of support cases recently on this, is currently at the time of recording, which is August 2022, we can't do square or rectangular hollow section stringers from the sort of standard sections in the macro. Has been raised. There is an ongoing case with our development team to look at changing this, so hopefully in the next release we will get a change on that, because we are aware of it. So before I change it to plate though, what we need to look at here is we've got an option for outer and inner, and at the top here, so I'm on the outer stringer, I've got a tick box here that says enable stringer. So if you didn't want an outer stringer for whatever reason, or an inner one, say it was floating, you do have the option to obviously have different stringers. Now if I want the outer and inner the same, I've got this tick box here that says identical stringer. So I can tick that, and then you can see that the options here are grayed out because the inner is now identical to the outer. It just means that I don't have to go through and do everything twice. So now that I have identical stringers ticked, I am going to say I want our stringers to be from a plate, and I'll leave it at 15 millimeters thick. So we can see now that's all changed to 15 millimeters. We can then go to the positioning tab. Now, this was a new feature for the 2023 release. You used to have to set the top distance, so from the nosing line to the top of the stringer, and then from the rear of the tread to the stringer, and that would give you your total plate width. So if you wanted, say, a 200 deep stringer, you'd have to then just start working out what you needed. We now have the option to say, okay, align based on just the top, please. That is now set to 20 millimeters, and you can see the pictures change. We don't have that distance from the rear of the tread to the stringer. So, and what we have though now is we have a total plate width. So in here, I can say, I would like you to be 220 millimeters, please. So that is a total width of 220 millimeters. The same on our landings. Let's say we do want it 20 millimeters above. I can say, right, I want to set my align on top, and we can say that we want that to be 20 millimeters. And because at the moment our total plate width on the stair is set to 220, the system is defaulting. You can see in here, system is defaulting that on our landings that's also 220 millimeters. If we wanted something different on the landing, because sometimes we do want a deeper landing for whatever reason, if it's been boxed in, we do have the tick box here to override the landing plate width. Then we'll look at the features. Now this applies to the top and the bottom of the staircase. Now the top, I'm going to leave the top for now because I'm actually going to put a little landing on the top here. So I don't need to change anything on the top. I could put a horizontal leg in, but because I'm doing a landing, the system is going to put the horizontal leg in for me. At the bottom, we've at the moment got a double cut, but I actually want to say, no, I want a vertical leg in there. And again, because I've got identical stringers ticked, you can see that it's doing for the outer and the inner. And then it's just a case of setting our values in here. So distance D1 is from our nosing position. So I want that to be a consistent 20 millimeters. The distance D2, that is from our setting out point there. So I'm going to set that to 0 because I don't want it going through the floor at the moment. We'll just put some angle cleats on outside of the macro. And then because I've got 220 millimeters everywhere, I want this to be 200, not 202, 220. And then the final option within our stringers is the miter cut. So again, everything is set to identical. Now within the PowerPack stairs and within the stairs and railings tools, we have what we call our tree structure. So if I expand my tree structure here, I've got my flight 1 and flight 2. So obviously flight 1 is here, flight 2 is there. So if I click on one of the flights, I'm just setting the information for just that flight. If I click on all flights, I'm obviously setting it for all flights. And with our stringers here, because they're plate stringers, we have the option within the macro to control where the miters are being put on. So these are plate stringers, these are advanced steel plates. if I'm getting them profile, do I want to be welding in here, or are we going to get it all laser cut? So let's say we're getting it laser cut. Where I've got miter cut, I want to untick the bottom, and that will merge those two plates together. So you can see now that is one stringer, and because I'm set on all flights, it's done it for the bottom of this one as well. Depending on obviously how long that is, we might need to weld that in there. For now, I'll just make them all merged. They're probably going to be too big. It's a pretty big staircase, this. Now, I'm sure some of you are typing at the moment. Can I split the stringers? It is a feature request that we've already added to the stair tools to improve for future releases. I don't know when that will happen, but it is something that we have already discussed and scoped out, so hopefully in the future we will have the option to split these stringers where we need them and where we can control them. So at the moment we can just control the miter cuts in there. But if we came in and we said, yeah, they're actually too big, we are going to weld them, I can come back to flight 1 and I can say, okay, on flight 1 I do want my miter split point in here. But then for flight 2, I need that at the bottom, so I can come in here and tick it on the bottom. That then gives me my split points. The inner one, because I said identical stringers, that is the same. And then we've got corner editing. Now, corner editing is obviously what happens in the corner. So we've got outer corners, and if we look at the underside in here, we've got our inner corner. Now, at the moment, my system, I'm not using any library entries, I'm just using literally what you get out of the box. So my library entry, my out of the box default setting is using this tongue and groove option. Again, I have the identical features, so I'm going to say, yeah, these are identical features. And then I've got my corners on my outer stringer and my corners on my inner stringer. So my outer stringer, we're going to put a connection on outside of the macro. So we talked about anyone that's done training with us, Greytech in the UK, we will say any of the macros will never do 100%, especially stairs and railings, of what you want. Hopefully you'll see from today's and Thursday sessions that the PowerPack stairs and railings tool will get you closer to 100%, but I'm still not going to stand here and say it'll do 100% of everything. So our connection between these two stringers, I need to put on outside of the macro. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this. Instead of tongue and groove, I'm going to make the first plate the priority. So what this will do is the first plate is the stringer, the outer stringer here. So this one takes priority over this landing stringer. On the inside, so I'm going to go to my inner stringer, I'm going to do the same thing. Now, the reason I'm doing the same thing is I'm going to say the first plate takes priority. When you do that with the inner stringers, we've got this option here, extend until outer stringer. So let's have a look at the underside. At the moment, the stringers are just doing that. Now I want these two inner stringers here to extend all the way through to the back so that we've got some things to support off. So this is my extend until outer stringer. And there we go. They have now extended through. And because we've got the 20mm extension above the floor, the system notches automatically around our floor thickness. So we've got our little notch in there. So that is what we can, some of the options that we can do with our stringers. A bit pressed for time, so I'm gonna crack on. So we've already looked at the treads, we've set the dimensions of the treads. We want to, I'm not going to put any nosing bars on in here, but if you want a nosing bar, we've got the option to do it from a profile, so a section that already exists in Advanced Steel, or do we want to create our own folded profile? and then you can see that we've got our horizontal leg, vertical leg, how is it connected to the tread. We can do that. Now that won't affect your setting out point. If I just quickly put one on just to show you, the setting out point remains unchanged. It's then adding that nosing to our setting out points. So we'll just turn that, for this example, we'll just turn it off. Tread connections. So if I come to the underside, so ours is a little bit different, the PowerPack macro. You choose your connection type. So is it a horizontal plate? Is it a vertical plate, or is it an angle? So for today, because we all want to be consistent across the treads and the landings, I'm going to choose angle. That will then add the angle in there. Then once we've chosen the angle, we then choose in the dialog how that angle is connected to the tread and to the stringer. Is it welded to both? Is it welded to the stringer, bolted to the tread? Is it the other way around, or is it bolted to both? So for today, we'll do it is welded to the stringer, bolted to the tread. With these macros, it is doing it quite a lot. Click the option, give it a few seconds for it to do what we want it to do. Then we can go into our general tab. We can choose the angle that we want it to use. Because I'm in a UK build, I want it to use a rolled steel equal angle. So I've chosen the option, wait for it to change, and we'll say that we're going to use a, let's say 70 by 6. If we had an unequal, we can obviously choose where the longer one goes. And then in here, shorten first edge, shorten last edge. So this is from our tread. So I've got a 15mm overlap. I'm probably going to then want to bring that another 10, 15mm. So I'm going to shorten the first edge 30mm. Now with these options, if you notice, when I type 30 and enter, I'll know when the macro's done what it needs to do, because it'll go 30.00mm, and then I'm happy to proceed. Are we putting some corner cuts on there? At the front, at the rear, we've got full control over what we need to do. Our weld is a 6mm fillet weld. And then our bolts, I'm going to set the bolt to... Now, if you've got the PowerPack installed, we have added some new bolts in there. So I'll choose one of the new countersunks. And we'll say they are M12s. And then again, it's all about looking at the dialog. From our angle now, what are our distances? So I'm going to set all of these to 30mm. So 30mm from the front edge, 30mm from the rear edge, and 30mm from the heel of the angle. That's all our treads, all connected up. You can see the countersunks in there. We'll move on to our landings. So our intermediate landing, we already set that right at the beginning, so I don't need to do any there. I don't want a bottom landing, but I do want a top landing. So top landing tab, we want to click the enabled option. We want to enable that top landing. It'll default to the left. No, that's right. I want a straight landing in here, so you choose left, right, straight or right. And the length, we're going to set that to, I moved it back 250, so let's just do 250. We'll notch it around a bit later. So that will give us that in there. Then the features. So now I've got an intermediate landing here. Now this plate is all one big plate at the moment. And I've got a top landing. I don't have any folds on any of those. So this is where I've got my covers. And again, we have got the tree structure in here. So all landings, intermediate landing, top landing. So I could set everything on all landings, but what I'm actually going to do is I am going to set this first option on all landings. So I need a downturn, a nose on all landings. So I'm going to enable the nose, and that will do it at this point here and this point here. Now, it defaults to a closed riser, so it goes all the way down to the floor, but I want my riser to be consistent. So I want to untick closed riser. My length was 50 mil. That will give me my 50 mil there. Oh, apologies. And my 50 mil in here. Now, I only want a rear fold on the intermediate landing. So within the tree structure, I'm going to go to the intermediate landing, and then I'm going to enable the heel. Again, it does a closed riser. I don't want that. I think I set this to 160, but we'll do 160 and not 460. That's silly. That's going to go up through. The macros will only do what we tell it to do. If I tell it to do something silly, it will do something silly. 160 in there, but I've done that on the intermediate landing. I didn't need to do it on the top because I don't want one. If you have set something, you've got a big tree structure, I can say copy from intermediate. Quite a good and maybe not as common feature, but once you set one, you can copy in the tree structure to the others. We do also have the option in here for a nosing bar, same as we did on the treads. So the last little bit we're going to look at for today's webinar, because we do only have 45 minutes, so probably I'm going to run a little bit over, is the landing connections and what we can do with the landings. So we have, again, jumping about a little bit there, we have our tree structure. So we have all supports, which is the intermediate landing and the top landing. If I set everything under all supports, then it will copy that information around. Now, if you have multiple landings, that's what I would do, and that's what I'm going to do, and then we can go in later and turn things off if we need to. So I'm going to mimic what we did for our treads. I'm going to set these to an angle. And I'm going to set them to bolted to the landings and then welded to the stringers. We're then going to come into here and we need to set the sections. So UK roll steel equal angle. Can't remember what I chose. I only did it 2 seconds ago. I think it was a 60. I'll pick 60 for this one because it's not critical in here. And then again, what are we doing in the corners? Now this is default into a miter cut. So if we have a look at the underside, might need to just turn this concrete off for this last bit. So we'll turn the concrete off. You can see in here that it's actually now mitering. That now obviously that's more work for us, more work in the workshop. If this has been covered up by a soffit, we don't need to spend that time doing that. So I'm going to come in here and I'm actually, again, at the top level of the tree, so all supports, I'm going to use, is it our first profile that's priority or second profile? We'll say it's the first profile that is our priority. Then one will run into the other. And I want to, because I'm going to have connections in there, I'm probably going to want to shorten all of these, let's just say by 30 mil. So this first edge should come back 30 mil. There we go. And then the second edge, that's where the second priority, we're going to bring that back 30 mil. So we've got a gap, we can then put our connection in there. Obviously we could bring this back. Corner cuts, same as on the treads. Shop welds in here. The bolts, we'll set those to our new countersunks. A little bit frustrating here. We are aware that we can't see the full width in here. And then again, the distances I'm going to set in here to 30 mil all round. Now, I know in some areas I'm going to want to go and tweak this and change it. Like we said, I'm running out of time very quickly, so I'm not going to do all of this. Now, what that has done, because I've done it at all supports, if I expand my intermediate landing, on my outer stringer, I've got 5 edges. So, this is our first flight. So edge 1 on our outer stringer is this point here. Edge 2 is this position here. Edge 3 is this one here. Edge 4 is this one here. And edge 5 is this one here. So this is maybe where I want to come into edge 1 and say, well, I don't want just 2 bolts, because that's a big old landing. That's nearly 4-ish, no, it's going to be 2.5 meters. I don't want 2 bolts. So in the tree structure, if I drill down into the area that I'm interested in, I can say, well, I actually want 5 bolts in there. Because I'm only at that part of the tree structure, it's only going to put that in there for me. Now, edge 2, the edge 2 and edge 4 and edge 5 are all quite long. So I can say, copy from edge 1 in there, and it'll put the 5 in there for me. Edge 3, I'm going to ignore that option. So if we have a look, there's my 5 bolts. Now maybe I could have set it at the top level to 5 for everywhere, and then gone into edge 3 and changed it back, which maybe, looking back at it, might have been a little bit quicker for me, because I'm pretty much going to have to go and do the same on my... So that's my outer stringer. On my inner stringer, it is the same thing. Edge 1 is this one here. So I want 5 in there, but because it's the inner stringer, we're going to go into that. But I'll tell you what I can do. On my inner stringer, I can click on the tree structure, I can click on the word inner stringer, set all of those to 5. But if we have a look at the top, if I come back round to the top, that has now put 5 in there, which I believe is going to be edge 3. Now we might, because it's supported on this edge and this edge in here, you might say, well, we don't actually need it supported on that edge there. So we could actually go back to the type here and set the type to none. And that should remove, if I've got my edges correct, that should remove that edge in there. So I could do the same on the outer string and say, well, oh, I've lost it. On the outer stringer, edge 3, I'm not actually interested in having one. So with the tree structure, I got full control over where I put all of this information. And that should have turned my support off in there, because it's supported by these ones in here and these ones in here. And then I've obviously got my top landing, but because I set everything to 2, that's going to put 2 fixings in there, which, yeah, okay, I need to readjust that, because obviously it's hitting my beam at the moment. But for today's example, that is absolutely fine. Then we have our support ribs. So again, the support ribs are these bits in here. And I've got intermediate and top landing. Well, top landing, I don't want any support ribs. So I don't have the option for none. What I would do is come into top landing here and set the number of support ribs to 0. And that's all I need to do. For my intermediate landing, that again is split into 5 areas. Now the areas are your landing extension number 1, this area here on the first flight, the area between the flights, the area on your second flight, and landing extension 2. So for my landing extension 1, I don't want any supports. Area 3, I can copy from area 1. I don't need a support in the middle there. It's only a few hundred mil wide. Area 5 is the same. I can copy from area 1. Area 2, okay, can choose my angles. Yeah, apologies, we are going to run a little bit over today. We'll make the angles all the same. If I set them to the right size. And then we can choose our spacings and cutbacks in here. So my DX1 and DX2, because I've got a 60mm angle, I probably want a 100mm cutback for those in there. I've got my start distance, so from the beginning of the area here to the start of the first one is 100mm. The distance between them, so I've got a 2-meter landing, so I probably put that at 1500, and we'll set the number of supports to 2. That will then add another one roughly about here. That's because I've just done it. Sorry, I'm looking at the area 2. That's that one there. And then I can say copy from area 2 into area 4, and that will add me an extra one in here. The last little bit, this landing plate is still one huge plate. So if we look at our split landing options, and I go to my intermediate landing, let's say we want a 1mm gap when we're splitting. We then got an option. How are we splitting the stringer, the landing? If you've got extended stringers, you can split it based on your extended stringers. Or if you have support, so the supports I've just put in, you can split it on the supports. But you need either one of those. So you need to extend your landing or split your stringers. So I'm going to use my split by extended stringer. So tick the box. Now I've got this as a landing. This is my second one. Split on the second one. And I've definitely run out of time. That is our 2-flight staircase with all the supports, all the split landings done within the macro. I've got to still put my connections on at the bottom and my connections for my landings. That's a sort of 10% that we are going to have to do manually outside of the macro. Okay, so as I said a couple of times there, apologies for running over, but hopefully you've seen what the macro can do. I'll just highlight the slide area. That is everything I had to show everyone today. So I will keep the session running for a few more minutes if anyone does have any questions. I'm just answering one to Murray, but I will send it to everyone. Let me send it and then I'll just talk through it. Okay, let me just send this. So the question we got asked is, if the macro can't use RHSs, can it use UBs or PFCs? I have just tested while that video is playing. It can't use UBs, but it will work with PFCs. And like I said in the response to Murray, and hopefully everyone saw that, I know that is something the development team are looking at currently, because I had to send them some example models for RHS stringers last week. So can't guarantee in the next release that it will be fixed, but I know it's something the development team are looking at the moment. And then The Murray's second question is the idea to get the macro close and then explode the joint and edit the parts. Yes, that is the idea. Like I said in the video, because every staircase, and it's what I spent the first 6 years of my career doing, was mainly stairs and railings. Every staircase is different. All the details are usually different. So I don't think we'll get 100% of the way there for every staircase. But the idea is to get to 95%. One thing I did put in the answer back to Murray is you don't always need to explode the boxes to do what you want to do. So if we're adding extra notches, extra cuts, extra chamfers, even putting in extra bolts and things, you don't need to explode the macro to do that. You can do that and still keep the intelligence of the macro. If we want to split our stringers in a different position, or we want to split our landings in a different position than what we can do within the macro, then splitting things is usually worth trying, but you will probably find that you'll get a warning message saying something like element is controlled by a macro, so you can't do it. That's the point, then you need to delete the macro. But whether you're using a PowerPack joint or any joint in advanced steel, it's always worth checking whether you can do what you want to do first before you explode the macro, because I would say 6 or 7 times out of 10 you might not actually need to explode the macro, so you can do these extra things to these elements and keep the intelligence of the macro there. Howard, for the bolt type, could you abbreviate countersunk to CSK now to see it in the dialogue? We couldn't actually, because when you install advanced steel, the out-of-the-box advanced steel has a bolt called CSK already. The PowerPack does install some extra bolts and some extra data, so therefore we have to give it a different name, and we've given it a name to match the ISO standard. So again, I can't guarantee when it's going to happen, but hopefully in future releases we will see those dialog boxes full width, so you can actually see the bolts without having to change anything in there. So I'll keep it running for another minute or two if anyone is typing any questions. If not, thank you very much for attending. The last session out of the 4 will be on Thursday at the same time, where we're going to look at the PowerPack railing tools. I've just seen a question come in. I've seen a couple of questions come in. Hang on a second. So Eddie, can I link to a webinar containing special part treads? I did do some training sessions for the stairs and railings a couple of years ago, and in one of those was a link to the PowerPack special parts. Let me just dig out the link, and I will put the link because there are links and training videos for these tools. So let me just put all of that in there, and I will send that to all. So there is a link. There's a link for, I think it's 2 hours of stairs training, 2 hours of railings training, which is very similar to what I've shown you today, but it does allow you to actually go through it, and there's training files in there as well. And the last question that's come in, does the macro contain welds? Yes, Murray, it does. It allows you, so I chose bolted connections in there. We can choose welds in there. We can set them to shop welds. We can set them to site welds. In certain areas of the joint, you can actually turn the welds off as well. And for things like landing connections, you can actually, for the support ribs, you can weld them to the stringers and stuff. You don't need them. You can choose whether they're connected to the stringers or whether they are connected to the landing panels themselves. So to answer your question, yes, the macro does contain welds. It's just that I happen to pick bolted connections in there. So I haven't seen any more questions come in. If anyone does, if you are if you do have any extra questions, if you're a UK customer and you have tech support, or if you're a customer anywhere in the world and you have tech support, please use your tech support. If you don't, then please please drop me an email. My information was at the beginning of the macro. Of the webinar. Sorry. I've got a couple of one more question about the welding. I tell you what I'll do. Let me share my screen just before we call it a day. And you guys should in the you guys should be able to see my screen now. So in the dialog, if I come into the railing macro, if we go to, let's say, the landing connections, if I come to the outer stringer here, I've got welds at stringer. So I've got weld size 6mm fillet weld, I've got shop or site weld, and then I do have my weld type in there. Now I don't know if that is an option for all. Let's have a look at my tread connection. So if we look at welds, yeah, I do have a weld tree in here, so on treads, on stringers. You can see I've got site and shop, and then I've got my different types of welds that are in the system. So Murray, yeah, it is possible to see the weld size and the type. Eddie, interesting to see the setting out points as a simple JPEG. If you look and watch the training videos that I sent through in your last answer, and there are training files in there as well, you can see an example DWG with all the setting out points, and then you guys can work through those DWGs with the training video step by step as well. Okay, so I am going to call it a day there. Thank you very much for attending, and hopefully I will see everyone on Thursday for the final part, which is the railings.